In this house, this is one of the more valued pieces of furniture. It sits central between the back door and the front door. We don't know how old it is, but it's done in that mission style of oak. It has a beveled mirror for one last look before you head out the door, a little compartment to store the keys, and plenty of space for such things as a shooting stick, a walking cane, or the umbrellas, which if they happen to be wet, these pans will pick up any of the water. Decorative tile backsplash, and plenty of hooks to hang up hats. I used to know someone who worked on that show. Well, anyway, I think we ought to take a shot at building one of these. Ah, boy, the perfect day to build an umbrella stand. By the looks of the weather out here, we're going to need to use some umbrellas this afternoon. But it's nice and dry and warm here in the shop. I'd like to show you our prototype umbrella stand. Pretty much like the original, built out of oak, and I guess the closest style of furniture this comes to is Mission. And I'd like to show you some of the details. Down at the bottom, the original had a metal pan to catch the water from the umbrellas. They tend to rust out and rot away. So what I chose to use is actually a flower pot liner. They come as clay, or in this case, plastic, so that should last for a long time. On the front of the stand, there's a turning, which is the leg, and it holds the frame together. This is actually a standard item that I picked up at the home center. It's just an oak stair baluster. Up in the middle, I built a key compartment, very much like the original. And above it, even though I'm not going to use tile on this one, I did make this opening big enough that if I find some nice 6-inch square tile, 5 will fit in there perfectly. Up here is a little shelf beneath the mirror. Now, the mirror can't be installed till after the piece is finished. And I do want to use a beveled mirror like the original. And I don't want to order beveled mirror until the frame is together and I can get real accurate measurements. And I'll just bring that down to my glass store. Above the mirror are some little spindles, also a standard item that I picked up from my woodworker's supply house. I'd also like to take a moment to talk about shop safety. Be sure to read, understand, and follow all the safety rules that come with your power tools. Knowing how to use your power tools properly will greatly reduce the risk of personal injury. And remember this, there is no more important safety rule than to wear these safety glasses. Now, the first part of the project I want to work on today is this back frame. These back uprights, which are 1-inch thick oak, and all the cross pieces that fit in between, which are 3/4-inch oak. So the first thing I did this morning when I arrived at the shop was to rip and joint all the pieces that I need for that part of the project. I also took the time to lay out on that vertical upright piece where the rails will intersect. Now, those joints between the rails and the stiles are all done with mortise and tenon joinery. I could use a mortising attachment in my drill press and the table saw to do that, but today I'm going to use something a little different. I'm going to use a mortise and tenon jig that I use with my router. Now, the jig sits on the upright. This is the other upright for the other side. And this hole right here is to make a mortise. Using a clamp, I secure the jig in position, aligning the scribe mark on the jig with the layout line for the mortise. Make sure it's clamped firmly in place and tight to the edge. Now, to cut the mortise, I'm going to use my router, which is equipped with a straight cutting bit and a little ball bearing at the top of it. And what you do is plunge the router into the work and allow the bearing to guide around the edge of the template. Now, it's very important that I do not remove the router until it completely stops turning. Otherwise, when I raise it up, I might damage the bit and the template. Now, when I cut the mortise, a lot of sawdust gets stuck in the hole. So it's a good idea to vac that out and then make another pass to make sure all the material has been removed. There's one more mortise to make on these long uprights, and it's on the face to receive these short side rails. I don't want the rail to be flush with the edge. I want it set in about a 1/2 inch. If I use the jig, as I have been, the mortise will be very close to the edge. I want it in a 1/2 inch. And the easiest way to accomplish that is to take this wooden block, which is 3/4 of an inch thick, and replace it with one that's a 1/4 inch thick. And that'll move the cut in just the right amount. Well, now I'm ready to cut some tenons on the end of some of the rails. And I'm going to start with the long rails. I'll use the same mortise and tenoning jig, except this time I'm going to use this portion of the jig. And I align these little scribe marks in the template with a center line that I've placed on the end of the rail. I clamp it in place, making sure it's good and firm on the end of the rail. And using the same router bit, I'm just going to route away the material for this half of the tenon. Now to finish the other half of the tenon, all I have to do is flip the template over, clamp it back down with a little screw that's underneath, and route it out. Okay, that takes care of the 3 long cross rails, and they seem to be fitting pretty well. Now you could calculate every single measurement for every single piece. It's a little bit tricky. I like to cut and fit each piece, check it as I go along. So now I'm ready to make the mortise and tenons for the 2 stiles that'll hold the mirror. Okay. Now this is what the back frame looks like with all the pieces mortised and tenoned and dry fitted together. Next I want to drill some holes for the spindles. I'm using a 1/2 inch Forstner bit, and the holes have to be about a 1/2 inch deep. Now, I was unable to find some 6-inch long spindles. Maybe you'll have better luck. But I did find some 10-inch spindles. And what I'm going to do is just modify them. The first thing I'm going to do is cut them to about 6.5 inches long right here at the miter box. The next thing I want to do is take this little portion at the bottom that's bell-shaped and make it into a tenon, like the one at the top. The easiest way to do that is over here at the table saw, where I'm going to hold it against my miter gauge and just spin it slowly into the blade. Now it's a good idea to coat all the mating surfaces, the tenons, the mortises, with a nice coat of this yellow carpenter's glue. I don't want to put too much pressure on this. I don't want to squeeze out all the glue. I just want to bring the joint together. Okay. Okay, now I'm going to check it for square, just by taking some diagonal measurements. All right, I got 46 5/8. Let's see what the other diagonal is. 46 9/16, just a little bit out of square, so I think I'll get another clamp. What I'm going to do is just put another clamp across the diagonal that was the longest. And just squeeze it together a little bit and check my measurement again. Okay, I got 46 and just a little over 9/16, and that should be right, but let's check the other diagonal just to be sure. Okay, and this one is just a little over 46 9/16, so we're good. I've clamped one of the uprights to the workbench, and I'm going to use my router which is equipped with a 1/2-inch diameter straight cutting bit and a 5/8 diameter collar. And what I'm going to do is actually set the base of the router right on the clamp and guide the collar against it. Now, to make up the difference between the diameter of the bit and the collar, I have to offset the clamp. In this case, 1/16 of an inch. Here's the layout for the mortise, and the first clamp will be set 1/16 of an inch away. Now, my shelf is 3/4 of an inch thick, so 3/4 plus 1/16 plus another 1/16 on the other side is 7/8. And instead of measuring it, I just made a 7/8 inch wide block. I'll slide the other clamp against it, tighten it down, and route it out. Now, as far as coming to this end point, I'll just do that by eye. Now, this is a little poster board template that I made of the top of that rear upright from the original. I'm just going to trace the outline, and then I'll cut it out using my handheld jigsaw. All right, a little bit of drum sanding to smooth up the saw cuts, and then I'll be ready for some assembly. Now, with the subassembly dried and removed from the clamps and the long uprights all sanded, now we start to see what the whole assembly looks like. And after I squeeze it together, I'm going to put some clamp pressure on it and set it aside to dry. What I'm doing now is making a stopped dado in adjacent sides of the bottom of the baluster. And I'm using the same techniques that I used to make the stopped dado in the back uprights. Those two dados will receive the bottom shelf at the front edge. I've set the umbrella stand up on the workbench so I can show you this subtle but important point about the balusters. The standard baluster has just square edges at the top, and that looks a little unfinished. So to dress up the top edge, I simply beveled all four edges at 20 degrees. Gives it a nice finished look. Now down at the bottom, there's always a problem with square edges. When you slide around, they want to chip. Now you could put a button, a furniture button under it, or you could just sand the edges. But I wanted the piece to look lighter also, so I simply beveled all four edges at 45 degrees. Now, both the top and bottom of the baluster are beveled at the power miter box. So I've set it up to do the top first. There's a stop down here against which I rest the baluster. I've turned the miter box to 20 degrees. Now I'll just cut, and rotate until it's finished. Now for the rails. There are two short ones, one on each side to join the baluster to the back frame, and one long one across the front that connects the two balusters. Now on the original, the front rail was a little bit higher in the middle, where the key box is. So earlier I took a piece of stock, put the tenons on the ends with my tenoning jig, and laid out to cut that elevation. I'll just use my bandsaw. Now all the rails have a little decorative bead at the top and bottom edge. To make that bead, I've set up my table saw with a molding head cutter, which is just a heavy wheel with 3 interchangeable cutters. Now this particular knife has a bead profile in the middle. So I've positioned it at the right height. I'm going to reinstall my filler plate, slide the fence over to the setting that I want, and run the pieces through. here I'm laying out to remove some material at each corner of the shelf so that it'll fit into the stop dado and tight against the baluster. I'll remove the material at the bandsaw. Now that's the material that I need to remove on the corner where it meets the back upright. Okay, now that takes care of the holes for the flower pot liners. I'm using a 1/2-inch radius round-over bit just to ease the edges of the shelf. Now there's one more little detail. Where the tenons from the front and side rails meet, they're going to bump into one another unless I trim a little off at the bandsaw. Some glue and a couple screws fasten the upright to the bottom shelf. And now it's just a matter of some more glue and some clamps to put the rest of the assembly together. An 1 5/8" screw through the baluster and into the end of the shelf holds everything together. And I'll plug the counter bore with this little dowel. So I've just cut one of the brackets that goes underneath the shelf beneath the mirror. One more to go. To reinforce the joint between the shelf and the top of the bracket, I made a slot with my plate joiner for a biscuit. Well, a little bit of glue and a couple screws hold the bracket. I've just made the corresponding slot for the biscuit in the bottom of the shelf. Using a chamfering bit, I've beveled the edges of the shelf. Now the lidded box, perhaps you might want to keep keys in there, is made from 1/2-inch oak. And the corner joints are rabbeted together, and the bottom sits in a dado. So I've set up my table saw with a 1/2-inch dado head cutter, and the first thing I'm going to do is run the rabbets through the ends of the side pieces. Now this is a 1/2-inch wide dado to receive the bottom of the box. Well, this piece will get used for the lid, and I've chamfered 3 edges. Now these 2 pieces will now be joined together with hinges. Okay, that takes care of the lid. Now the lid is going to get attached to the box with some biscuits. I've already made the slots in the box. Now I'm going to make the slots that go in the lid itself. First, I'm going to take the lid assembly and clamp it to the lower rail. Well, now I pre-drill and screw the lid to the lower rail. Now with glue on the biscuits and in the slots, I can slip it up into place, clamp it at the back, and nail it in the front. The decorative pieces between the uprights and the stiles are made of 1/2-inch oak, and they're easily cut here on the bandsaw. I traced a pattern made from the original. These little decorative elements are held in place with a little bit of glue and just one nail to hold it in place while the glue dries. Now all that's left to do is measure and order up the mirror, figure out what color stain I want to use on this piece, and then stain it and urethane it, put the hardware on, and this piece will be ready for the umbrellas and the hats. I'm really pleased with the way the finish turned out on this piece. We've installed the decorative tiles, a beveled mirror, and plenty of brass hooks for hats.